ready to go in three, two, one.
Welcome to the Satisfied Woman podcast. I'm your host, Alanna Kaivalya. This podcast is dedicated to helping women lean into their femininity and rediscover the power of their feminine gifts. We take a look at what it means to be a modern woman and how we can live a satisfied life on our own terms. Visit the hub at thesatisfiedwoman.com. So, this is podcast number 3 on this show, and I'm so excited to be back. I've been podcasting for a long time, and I cannot wait to bring the wisdom of satisfaction to you, my fine fellow lady, throughout these podcasts with all of the topics that we'll cover. If you missed episodes 1 and 2, make sure you go back and listen. The first episode covers a little bit more about me and the work that I'm doing now, and the second episode talks a little bit about what it means to be a satisfied woman, and perhaps most importantly, we define what satisfaction is. On this episode, I wanted to bring you just a brief overview of the feminine polarity. What is the feminine? And it is brief because, as you can imagine, the feminine is vast and there's a lot to talk about. In fact, it's going to fill this entire podcast and every show we discuss. But I wanted to just give us a bit of a baseline and you a bit of an understanding of the feminine polarity and also a really simple tool to help make sure that you're on the feminine polarity. In fact, when I bring this tool to you, it might surprise you. I know that when I ask this of my friends, they are fascinated by the response. So we'll get to that. It's like a little bit of a cliffhanger now with the show. The feminine polarity is an energy. It's a psychological energy. It's an element of the psyche. Now, my background is psychology, so that's generally how I think of these things. Femininity is an energy, it is not a gender. That's probably one of the biggest things I have to help people understand with this work, that femininity isn't always attached to being a woman. We live in the modern world. We understand that there's a lot of gender fluidity. There's different ways that people identify. There's different sexual identities. Everything is okay under the sun. Absolutely everything is okay under the sun. Any way that you express yourself, identify yourself, it's all good. This particular podcast and the work that I do speaks to those who are on the feminine polarity and in particular inhabit a female body. Doesn't make any other expression wrong, different, bad, devalued, hierarchical, none of that. It's just that that happens to be the body and the expression that I have. And those happen to be the kind of people that I am best equipped to speak to and work with, because that's my biggest set of experience. So, that said, femininity is an energy, particularly a psychic or psychological energy. It's not a gender. Every human being under the sun, all of us has both masculine and feminine energies within the psyche. These are the polarities. Our whole universe exists in polarity. We have light and dark. We have the sun and the moon. We have the outside. We have the inside. We have positive and negative. And that's not a value judgment. That's literally like the magnetic poles. Everything exists in opposition, and it exists in opposition in the psyche too. We have the conscious, the unconscious, we have the masculine and the feminine. Swiss psychologist Carl Jung identified this long ago as he was developing his own psychological ideals or theories in terms of his own depth psychology. He did an incredible job of mapping out the unconscious, giving us language to the unconscious, helping us understand the nature of dreams and myth. And he also, in his work, identified that every person has an oppositional polarity operating within the psyche. For men, he called that oppositional polarity or the feminine the anima. And for women, he called that oppositional polarity or the masculine the animus. Now, Carl Jung did an amazing job laying the foundations for this work, and we are here 100 years later understanding that all of us has both in the psyche, and there are many different ways that people express themselves. So every human has both masculine and feminine within them. we might express ourselves most fully on one polarity, but we still have the other polarity operating within us. As Carl Jung would suggest, you've got the opposition within you, yearning to be expressed or acknowledged in some way, and when we don't express or acknowledge it, we run into problems, and that's where we work in therapy and psychology and different retreats and training and shadow work and whatever it is that we might do to start to unpack and uncover the deep layers of the unconscious and the psyche. As humans, as we operate in the world, we may pull forward one or the other polarity depending on what we need. So even as a feminine woman, during the day, there may be times that we have to express the masculine. Perhaps when we're driving down the freeway, we've got to change lanes really quickly and it's a really focused and directed experience. The feminine is not going to help us with that. The masculine is. If we find ourselves in a boardroom at the head of a table with all of the faces looking up at us, being called to lead, to guide, and to make a decision, the masculine is going to help us to do that, even for us feminine women in female bodies. We're going to have access to both polarities. And all of us as humans can switch back and forth at any time when it's needed. The challenge becomes when any one of us gets stuck in one polarity for too long, or if we express either of the polarities in an unhealthy or a distorted way. So that's what my work helps us to do, is to express our natural polarity primarily for those of us that are feminine women most fully and most healthfully, and to tease out the distortions of these polarities so that we can express them in the best and most healthy way possible. For those of us that identify as feminine women, we understand living in this modern time that we have been surrounded by. We have grown up in a patriarchal culture. It is what it is. I'm not here to vilify it. It is the culture, and it definitely comes with its challenges. And the patriarchal culture has worked for a very long time at distorting and devaluing both the masculine and the feminine. If you've heard of this term toxic masculinity, that might ring for you as one way these polarities get distorted. Anytime we hear a healthy, brave woman who speaks out being called crazy, that's a distortion and an oppression or a vilification of the feminine. So there's a lot of misunderstanding. There's a lot of negativity on both sides for both polarities. And we will all of us in any body with any expression, we will all thrive if we understand the polarities and we express them in the healthiest, most vibrant way possible. Both polarities are valid. Both polarities are good. Both polarities have their strengths. Both polarities are essential. One cannot exist without the other. So no one is completely masculine and no one is completely feminine. But each one of us will have a dominant polarity. We will have a primary polarity, one that we want to relax or lean into more of the time. Again, calling up either one when we need it, but one that we want to relax and lean into more of the time. The time and place that most of us will relax and lean into a primary polarity is going to be an intimate relationship. It just happens to be in an environment with another human being who exists on the opposite polarity, that gives us the space to kind of almost outsource the one that isn't our primary. So for those of us who are feminine women, we will want to be in an intimate relationship with another human who identifies primarily as the masculine. And it's almost like giving us permission or a space to take our own masculine energy that we have to use a lot in this day and age, in this patriarchy, in this world. The world is masculine around us. The culture is masculine. It values the masculine. It's pulled that forward and up and distorted it a bit. When we get to outsource that to our intimate partner, we can relax into the feminine. Now, I'm not saying that's not true for the masculine. Maybe they feel the same. But I think for those of us on the feminine polarity, we are at a detriment in the patriarchy, in this culture, where the terms of the culture are on masculine terms. The measures of success are on masculine terms. The measures of okayness, rightness, pretty much everything have been determined by the masculine. For better or for worse, it is what it is. When we live in that kind of culture that values and props that up, being powerfully feminine is often questioned, vilified, diminished, even by women. And I say that with full ownership. I have done that as well in my past. And part of the work that I do here with you is to make sure that we identify when that's happening and to no longer do that. Femininity is incredibly powerful. Okay, power is inherent in both polarities. Power is not just a masculine trait. Feminine is not weak. It's not meek or mild, and the feminine is certainly not quiet. So things that we have been taught as feminine women, I know that when I grew up, even still, which is not that long ago, I mean, we won't reveal how old I am in this podcast, I guess, but in my history, so in one or two generations ago, even I was still being taught that little girls are meant to be seen and not heard, that little girls are only pretty when they smile, that little girls should, delight others, that they should be happy all the time, that little girls should be soft. Little girls are not always those things. And in fact, the feminine is not those things. The feminine is wild. The feminine is expressive. The feminine is loud. And there is power in that wildness and that expressiveness and that loudness. Perhaps the most important qualities of femininity, and the feminine has a lot of qualities. The feminine is creative as well as procreative. The feminine is sensual. The feminine is musical, lyrical. The feminine is always in motion. The feminine exists in cycles, right? The feminine has lots of qualities. The most important qualities, the most valuable, if we could place a hierarchy, and I can't stand hierarchy, so I can't even believe I'm doing it right now on this podcast, but if we could place a value, if you forced me, if you said, Alanna, you have to pick the two most valuable qualities, what I would say, hands down, the things that really are the foundation of the feminine are intuition and emotion. Now, in terms of the psyche, where feminine energy lives, intuition and emotion are in the unconscious. They are in the unconscious realm of the psyche. The masculine's greatest traits are logic and reason. Reason are the rules by which logic is made to work. Okay, logic is a kind of thinking, and reason is like the rules, the parameters. We reason through things. Those are powerful qualities as well. Logic and reason exist in the conscious mind. So we have three elements, three really powerful and prominent parts of the psyche. We have the conscious mind, which is logic and reason. We have the unconscious mind, which is intuition and emotion. And then we have the supra-conscious mind, which is all of the things that you and I have access to but aren't necessarily intrinsically part of who we are. So the collective consciousness, for example, or for those of us who participate in any kind of spiritual or religious practice, that numinous quality of connection to others or the universe, that's the supraconscious, and that does connect us all. That is in there somewhere. When we become inspired by something, when we get like an inspirational hit, we're all getting that from the supraconsciousness that we have access to as part of our psyche. But the part of our psyche that is ours, our own, that isn't a part of anyone else's experience necessarily, are the conscious and the unconscious. The unconscious mind is what we don't have access to consciously. But interestingly enough, it dominates our life. And it is the feminine. It is the feminine. It's the feminine part of us. And if we can anthropomorphize that for a moment, if we can take the unconscious and the conscious and make them into, say, cartoon characters, I think of the unconscious as that woman that just won't be ignored. She just won't be ignored. And perhaps in our lives we've all known that woman, the woman who others might call pushy. Well, thank goodness she was pushy because she created change. Or that woman who was nagging us, and we thought it was nagging because we weren't ready for that message. We weren't ready for that change. It got us out of our comfort zone. But once we finally listened to, everybody actually benefited. The unconscious, for us, speaks to us in our dreams, through our emotions, through our intuition, and also through our triggered events, our triggered moments. Anytime that we have a triggered emotion, when we become really activated emotionally, even for a small thing, that's the unconscious speaking to us, and it needs to be addressed. A lot of our shadow work, a lot of the work of therapy and psychologists and psychology is working with the unconscious. It's addressing that deep need within us for what is good and right and true according to our own soul, our own heart, our own insides. Nothing is more responsible for that than the feminine. This is the feminine's domain. The feminine exists in this space, in this incredible, fertile, and yet dark ground. I remember, my mother said this, and I'm sure perhaps your mother may have said this too. This is like a thing that moms say. I brought you into this world and I can take you out. It's a little aggressive, I will admit. And I think most moms don't actually mean that literally when they say it, but you're getting in trouble and she wants you to know it. She says, I brought you into this world, I can take you out. Shakespeare even knew that the feminine, the domain of the woman, is both the womb and the tomb. The feminine is able to give life and also to recreate, procreate, or regenerate life through death. The feminine is unafraid of these things. It harbors these things happily and comfortably as long as they are tended to and heard. It's when the feminine is repressed or ignored that we start to run into problems. Everybody, and I mean everybody, because remember, everyone's unconscious is filled with these qualities. Everyone has both feminine and masculine. It just depends on what you're going to express more naturally or what you're going to express through more fully. Those of us who identify more primarily with the feminine, we have great access to these qualities of intuition and emotion. It is our primary decision-making force. Whereas for those who identify as the masculine, their primary decision-making force will be logic and reason. And that's a problem when they don't check it against their emotions and intuition. And for the primary feminine, emotions and intuition can cause some havoc if it's not checked against logic and reason. Healthy adults of either polarity use both. It's just which comes first, which is the driving primary force. Intuition and emotion is a powerful driving primary force, and it has unfortunately been incredibly repressed, incredibly distorted, and incredibly vilified throughout history. I don't know a woman who, even in this day and age, when expressing emotion and intuition in her life in a place or a circumstance that is unsafe, hasn't been called crazy. It's like the first thing that is brought out of the harmful toolkit by the distorted masculine or the patriarchy to hurt and suppress and oppress the feminine. It's crazy. It's actually not crazy. It's the most valuable tool that the feminine has for determining what is safe, what is comfortable, what is right, and also for being the catalyst to change. The feminine exists in change. Think of the bodies of feminine women. Now, it is true that most often, again, not always, right? Because we live in the future now. We know that every expression of gender identity and polarity is fine. But most often, those of us born in female bodies are going to be on the primarily feminine polarity. Just most often. And that has a lot to do with our biology. We are in bodies that are able to quite literally generate life. We are in bodies that change constantly, that are dominated by hormonal fluctuations every month, and also throughout our lives that male bodies just don't have. They just don't have them. Women's bodies are dominated by change. They're dominated by life energy. We feel this every single time that we have a menstrual cycle every single month. It is the opportunity to create life, and then if we don't, that life potential fades away and bleeds from us. We have to contend with that every single month. There's a constant force of nature that is inbuilt and ingrained and influencing our psychology all of the time. We must be friends with change because it is who we are. So when we feel that sense of discomfort, like things aren't quite right, it's not that we are trying to cause trouble. And it's not that we're crazy. It's that sense of discomfort arises within the feminine always first in order to course correct, in order to create change. Things wouldn't change if it weren't for the feminine. For the masculine, the status quo, that straight line is fine. There's no reason to change it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. There's no fluctuation for the masculine. And think of the biology of a masculine body or a man's body. There isn't a hormonal fluctuation every month. There isn't, a menstrual cycle that begins in early adolescence, and then, the potential for having life be born of the body, and then a menopausal state. It's just, they hit puberty, and then they live in that state until they don't. So there is a constant sort of sense of linear direction for the masculine, and that's incredibly powerful and important if we are trying to get to a destination. When we want to get to a destination, when we want to go from point A to point B, there's nothing better than the masculine than to help us get there. The feminine wants to go in circles. It is cyclical. It wants to spin around. It wants to change pathways. It wants to go down a different road. Not that we can't go forward. We have that masculine energy to go forward and to get things done, of course. But one is not correct. Both in conjunction, working together, are what create what is most right, good, and true for everyone. So that one linear direction the masculine doesn't want to stray from sometimes needs to be nudged. And it's the feminine that will nudge it. It's the feminine that will poke and say, hey, look, I don't think this is right. This doesn't feel good. We need to go in a slightly different direction. We need to course correct here. We need to change. I'm uncomfortable. It will come from the intuition and the emotions of the feminine. That's what will prompt the course correction and the change. And it might feel annoying to the uninitiated or uneducated masculine. And what I would like to do, as a part of all the work that I do here on the podcast and through my book, The Way of the Satisfied Woman, is to normalize this. And not just normalize it, but to elevate it. That this is the first sign, kind of like the canary in the coal mine, that things need to shift. There is nothing more powerful than a woman's intuition, which turns into a woman's inquiry. No one questions like the feminine. The feminine brings up questions. Why? The masculine says, because. The feminine says, when? The masculine says, but how? So we're governed by time. We want to know when. We don't have time to waste. We have very specific timelines in our bodies that things need to happen on. Masculine men don't have that. They can put things off. They can stretch things out. Women have to do things now. We want things now. We always demand now, and we always demand more. But that's what's right for us. That's what's true for us. And, that's what makes things happen. We make change. We create inquiry. We brainstorm. We find new ways of generating more life in an area where there is not enough life being supported. If it weren't for the feminine, things would not flourish. The feminine is nourishing, and it is flourishing. It's where life energy is inbuilt and ingrained, and it is where pleasure is derived. It's through the feminine, and everyone else benefits from that. It is a beautiful gift of the feminine to the world when it is feeling that life energy, that source of pleasure, that source of creativity and or procreativity. That's what's inbuilt in the feminine woman's body. That's what's in our psyche. That's what drives us. Again, we have lots of qualities, but if we focus on the intuition and the emotion, if we understand that the unconscious is our domain, that our dreams are what create the reality of our futures, that's the power of the feminine. When it's misunderstood, it's oppressed. When it questions the status quo, it's shoved to the side or silenced. That's what the distorted masculine does. The healthy masculine honors it. The healthy masculine listens. The healthy masculine understands its own limitations of that logic, linear thinking, and knows it needs that cyclical wave-like push from the feminine to really make things happen, to really get to the most optimized finish line that it could possibly want to get to. Meanwhile, the feminine is basking in its creativity and its life energy and its pleasure and its joy. And again, this exists in all of us. But for us feminine women, it exists in us most fully. And it's time for us to find spaces and create places and environments and relationships that center this as the most valuable gift of being a woman. Intuition and emotion and its healthiest expression, that internal compass coming forth, the unconscious speaking out from us, that these psychic energies have value, the most value, to create the kind of future and the kind of world that makes everyone safe and fosters everyone's joy and goodness. So, again, this is a topic that we will continue to unfold and work with throughout the podcast, but I wanted to give us a bit of a context, a psychological context for what the feminine is, so that we can continue to move forward on our journey together as we learn to walk the way of the satisfied woman. I thank you for being on this path with me, and I look forward to speaking to you on the next podcast.